Hello, all you positive heads out there. It's so good to be back with all you beautiful reflections of the one source consciousness that creates and animates all things. If you're new to this podcast, of course, we are super happy to have you here, and we just ask that you bring an open mind and heart to your listening experience and to be prepared to explore vantage points that I'm convinced will help shift or solidify your current understanding of the ultimate nature of reality in a way that is extremely empowering. Speaking of exploring powerful perspectives, I would like to gift my book, The Golden Key, Modern Alchemy to Unlock Infinite Abundance to you at goldenkey.gift, where you can get the audio or ebook as my gift to you by using the code POSITIVEHEAD at checkout. All right, all you positive heads. On this week's interview episode, I'm very happy to have Dr. Carmen Boulter here with me on the show. Carmen is a renowned ancient Egypt researcher who inspired the 5-part documentary series, The Pyramid Code, that can currently be found on Netflix. This incredible series is based on the extensive research done by Dr. Boulter in 25 trips to Egypt and 51 other countries around the world. Hello there, Carmen. Welcome to the show.
Hi, now it's 31 trips to Egypt and 61 different countries.
Oh, well, you obviously are not a woman who sits idle. I thought of that. As soon as I was reading it off, I'm like, I bet you she's going to correct me, and it's changed since. So, wow, that is incredible. That is incredible. Well, before we dive into all the ins and outs of those trips and what you've uncovered and discovered and so forth, I'd like to start with the same question and end with the same question on my episodes and on my interviews. And the starting question I like to ask is, let's say you're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You have 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
Well, I've always had an undying passion for Egypt, and it started when I was a little girl before I even really realized where Egypt was or what it was. And it seems like I came in with past life memories. And so even if I think that I'm kind of finished with it or don't want to go back, that doesn't last very long. And Egypt won't leave me alone any more than I'll leave it alone. So I can say that ancient Egypt is my undying passion.
Wow. Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And, I guess, let me see where there's so much good stuff to talk about here. I'm trying to think where do we even begin? I mean, this is such a deep rabbit hole of magic and mystery. And I guess maybe before we dive into a lot of the Egypt stuff, I'd love to just get a quick overview of your story. How did you end up, where doing this? How, I'm sure there are people out there listening like, wow, what a fascinating life trajectory. How did Carmen end up on this path? So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about, where you born and raised and how you ended up here.
I was born and raised as a little French girl in Montreal, Quebec. And by the time I was 6 years old, I was having past life memories. So somehow I ended up clairvoyant and psychic. And I wasn't really sure what these memories were, but I couldn't not pursue it. And so by the time I was 8, I was reading books about Egypt. My father happened to have books on the Sphinx. And actually, as a little girl, whenever there was a thunderstorm, I knew he would be awake in his rocking chair outside watching the thunder and lightning. And he'd say, I think they had anti-gravity when they were building Stonehenge. And he'd say, there's lots of mysteries that aren't understood. And I'm 3 years old going, what do you mean, Daddy? So honestly, my father challenged me a lot. And, he sent me to finishing school in Switzerland and all kinds of adventures with, horseback riding and dressage and all these different things. And so I was already traveling a lot when I was a child. I took my first flight when I was 6 years old. So that's and he was a traveling salesman. So I would jump up and down on his bed while he was packing and unpacking his suitcases. And so I guess I've had this travel lust running through me for a long time, but I also really started to be serious about research. I was going to do my PhD in archaeology, I was accepted to the University of Calgary, actually, as a student to do my PhD, and had supervision all set up at Cairo University in the Faculty of Archaeology. And I did a whole summer of research in the Rare Books Library and the library attached to the Egyptian Museum and to Cairo, American University in Cairo. So I did a lot of original research, but soon into that, I realized that pretty much all Egyptologists toe the party line, tell the same story. And one of the things that I've, started just realizing is that they read Egyptology like they read the news. So, this person was married to this person, and they from this date to this date, and they lived here. And it doesn't really explain who the Egyptians were, what they knew, what their value system was. And to me, that's not really good information. I mean, if it's this year or that year, who cares? I mean, it's like, what were they doing and what were they thinking is more important.
Right.
So what I decided is to learn how to do proper research and data collection and data analysis and all of that, and to apply it to Egyptology myself, my own way. And that's where the Pyramid Code came from. So I didn't have to repeat what they say. So when someone's being trained as an Egyptologist in Egypt, and I've known several of them, they get scripts. Ramses II caught off the hands of his enemies, and he was warring, and they go through and they would recite the script. And we know that it's one of the best mysteries ever, up there with Atlantis. Right. And we can't leave it alone, and yet to just regurgitate and repeat and be afraid to step outside the dynastic period of Egypt, for instance, which was already patriarchal, and missing all the nuances of when Egypt was at its peak, at its most spiritual place, and then how things deteriorated, and looking over long periods of time at what could have happened in Egypt instead of the pyramids were built in 2450 BC by Cheops and all this stuff that's really not verifiable and far too specific to actually help us much.
Yeah. So, one of the things that your series discusses is the idea that Egyptians were living actually in a golden age. So these were not humans that were, primitive like we view them, but rather, they had, knowledge and maybe even technology that we don't today, correct?
Well, when we say golden age, if you think about Atlantis, it had time to go through a number of precessional cycles. And one of the things that I'm most pleased about with the Pyramid Code is how it elongated time. So instead of just looking at things in the last 5,000 years, which is what school and the Bible and the Quran want us to do, what if we looked way, 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 way back? And if we're looking at alignments on the Giza Plateau, a la Beauval and Hancock of 10,500 years ago, what if you added 26,000 years of a precessional cycle to that and a second cycle? So Egypt had time to be in a golden age and then dip into the iron and back into a golden. And I think that's what we're trying to locate things in one point in time instead of over periods of time, and how things could have waned and, ascended and descended. And so Egypt wasn't only ever one thing. Let's put it that way.
Right. When you talk about the idea that modern man, woman being here, what are they saying now, 300,000-ish years, then you look at the alignments of the pyramids and say, okay, what if this was not, this was 26,000, because every 26,000 years there'd be the same alignments, correct?
That's right.
So it can go way back. I mean, they may have been built, 52,000 years ago or whatever it is, plus or minus a few. So it's a fascinating thought and idea. And, I guess that's one place I just curious in all your research is if you had to speculate now on when they were built, have you come to an era? Have you come to any sort of, hypothetical guess?
Ripley's, believe it or not, you said it, 52,000 years ago.
Wow. Interesting.
Yep, I'm getting more and more comfortable with that. And Hakim, who's the indigenous wisdom keeper throughout the series, the Pyramid Code, that's what he thought. And so, if you think about 11,500 years ago with the alignment, well, there was a world flood. That's not when Egypt's going to be at its peak, if everything's underwater. And, so for various reasons. But the thing is, it could have also lasted for a whole precessional cycle. And so there's lots and lots of reasons why I've come to think that. And slowly, alternative researchers are allowing themselves to look further back.
Right. Right. And it's just it's wild that we've ever tried to sort of put a cap on that to begin with. And I guess it has a lot to do with sort of the religious dogma and things. You know, here we're going to feed you. This is what's happened. Before that, there wasn't anything going on there. You know, and it's so refreshing to see that veil slowly being lifted. And of course, some of the ideas that are coming out. You know, one of the things that you talk about also in the Pyramid Code is, you know, this whole sort of idea that they were tombs, which there's really no real evidence that the pyramids were tombs, you know. And then of course there's other what to me seem like much more plausible, you know, ideas of what they were, you know, like they actually, you know, were energy generators, subtle energies at the pyramids, and you know, they possibly emitted a field that helped to uplift humanity, you know, on these ley lines. Can you speak on that concept a little bit?
Well, they're absolutely huge, and there is a network of passageways underneath. The Band of Peace is the first episode, and it's looking at 22 pyramids at 6 distinct sites that go for, you know, 20 plus kilometers. Well, why would you need something that big? And the Nile used to run right in front of the foot of the Sphinx, and you can see the old riverbed, and that whole thing is developed. That idea is developed quite elaborately in the Pyramid Code. And so, okay, there's all kinds of evidence of water marks, of chemical processes that went on. The splitting of the hydrogen and oxygen molecules from water. Hakeem would tell you by looking at the ancient Suf language that priests and priestesses were those who dealt with water. So we get mixed up with electrostatic energy and all of that, but there's such a thing as electromagnetic energy. And the actual energy of the pyramids works with quartz crystal, the double helix of quartz under pressure. And so when you start to look at the Paleozoic, or however you say that word, the electrical charge that's innate in stone, if you think about how these could have been huge devices that defy space and time. And the evidence is there. And I spent 5 years in and out of the underground passageways after the plateau would close. And most of them are blocked. But there are places where you actually can stand up and they're quite high, and other places where they're quite low. But there's all kinds of passageways that feed into the bigger ones that come from different levels. And so when we think about Abu Ghraib, where the crystal altar is, Hakeem would tell you that the crystal altar, that the center circle that's about 6 feet across, that's the lid on a shaft that's 180 feet deep. And if you look at Saqqara, there are these enormous passageways with staircases going down that seem to be able to feed from other places. So it would have been a giant power plant of some description. Chris Dunn brought us that first from an engineering point of view, but now we've got James Ernest Brown, who measured a lot of the salt incrustations. And if you think the Nile would have been fed by the Mediterranean, and it would have been partially salt water, and that those passageways at various times of year would have filled up. And so the whole of the agriculture and the fertility of Egypt was based on the Nile flooding and receding. And so all of this fits together. So the more I walk around there and look at the different kinds of stone that are interacting with each other, the schist disc that's in the museum, that's in the Pyramid Code, the sound and light technology, everything had to do with some kind of an exchange of water, charging water, using electrified water. And then if you look in the temples, you'll see all kinds of evidence of that as well. So the offering tables and what they were doing, the evidence that comes from King Tut's tomb, the gold Faraday cages, if you will, not sarcophagi, could have been working in concert with one another. And so once you start to accept that as an idea and look around, it's interesting because, you know, Egypt, all of these images and artifacts are staring at us. And we kind of, shrug our shoulders and look and go, I don't know. And then, and then
Right.
the traditional Egyptologists kind of, say, well, they were infantile and they were obsessed with death and all that. Well, they didn't have a word for death. So we have
Right.
superimposed our
Right.
view on them. And let's just start with, they were a whole lot smarter. They were a whole lot more in tune with nature. They knew how to live well. They were healthy. And they understood cosmology, biology, and we've been looking at them going, we can't relate really to, unless we have a new set of definitions and a new way of interpreting hieroglyphic, we will never figure out what they're doing, especially if they keep repeating, Ramses was a warrior and right?
Right. Yeah, it's funny to say they're obsessed with death, and then on one hand, and then they didn't have a word for it on the other. It's like, well, if you're obsessed with something, you might have come up with a word for it. I don't know, and it's really fascinating when you think about it being a power plant, if you will, and you go into great detail in the Pyramid Code about that concept, and how the pyramids are built like an insulated wire with the types of limestone inside and then the type that's outside. And one of the things that you said that made a lot of sense, well, someone had said it really felt like a machine being inside of it, and as you put it, yeah, and if something's a machine like your oven, you wouldn't decorate the inside of it, and there's no decorations inside, right? So all that really, you look at it the way you guys break it down in Pyramid Code, and it really is such a compelling, logical, argument.
Well, that's the thing. And what Hakim says in the Pyramid Code is, it's not fair to deny what you can see and touch with your own hand.
Right. To
make their theory work, you've got to make up that there's mummies somewhere. Well, they're all in the Valley of the Kings, and it started in the 18th dynasty. That's not what the pyramids were for. And the fact that they've never found a mummy in any pyramid, straight-sided pyramid ever, doesn't deter them.
Yeah. Right. Now, there's all kinds of different ideas out there. What people, I guess, refer to as like pyramidology. Some of these ideas that sharpening, using pyramids to sharpen razor blades or improve health, or preserving foods, and even multidimensional travel used for some purpose like that. What are your thoughts on some of those ideas?
Well, there's been some good scientific evidence of people building small pyramids, big pyramids out of all kinds of different materials and taking a razor blade and it gets sharpened. Now, my own personal experience was that in the days of Walkmans and Discmans, because I've been going to Egypt since 1977, I would take the batteries. The batteries, 2 AA batteries would last for 12 hours, and I'd put them in the pocket of my jacket. And then I'd wear the jacket into the pyramid and spend the afternoon in there. So 3.5 hours, I'd come out and I could use those batteries for 6 more hours.
Wow.
Every time. So it would give them a charge passively to give half the amount of energy that they had given me when I bought them new.
What a trip. Is that something, and you saw it every single time you would spend time in the pyramids?
Every single time. I always kept the batteries and put them in my pockets. And now there was this little girl. She was the youngest person I ever had come to Egypt, with her whole family, her aunties, uncles, grandma, sisters, brothers, parents. And we're standing outside the Great Pyramid. She goes, "Oh, Mommy, I forgot to charge the battery of my camera. Oh, I really wanted to take pictures in there." Because we had a private meeting in there. Anyway, so I said, "Alexa, why don't you just put the camera in your pocket and go in the pyramid and wait a few minutes and then see if it'll turn on?" She goes, "Really?" Uh-huh. I go, "Just try it." So, of course, she took all kinds of pictures, and she came out and, "Oh, my God, the pyramid charged my camera by itself."
Wow.
So she'll never forget that. That little girl will never forget that. Well, she's not little anymore.
Right. Wow, that is fascinating, that to actually have those firsthand accounts. And then, of course, you have the, in Pyramid Code, one of the episodes, I don't remember which is talking about the, what is his last name, Simmons, using a wine bottle in the 1800s and a story of charging it and sort of electrocuting someone who was coming at him. I thought that was a really, really interesting story account.
Yeah, brush discharge. But there's accounts like if you take vitamins and health formulas and put them under a pyramid for a while, then they end up, having more health benefits. Taking fruit and leaving one set of fruit out on the counter and one under a pyramid, and the fruit under the pyramid doesn't spoil. Okay, I mean, there's lots of that around, and
wow.
the pyramids have to be aligned. I suppose they work better if they're built out of certain kinds of substances. There's ways that you can dampen the energy and increase it. But by and large, the energy fields and the shape of the pyramid seem to have some kind of an effect, but not only on health products and the human body, but on the psyche. So I've run a number of studies. I have a device that measures consciousness fields, the size and robustness of the auric field and chakras. And it had hundreds and hundreds of readings with people who've come to Egypt with me, doing a baseline, putting them in the sarcophagus for 2 minutes and measuring them and then measuring them later. And looking at synesthesia, which is cross-sensory perception, and what would actually make somebody more aware and more psychic.
Right, where you can kind of see, like, where synesthesia, where you can see sounds as colors or
hear
whatnot,
pictures, right? All that.
Yeah.
And across the board, I had significant results that was less than 1 in 1,000 chances that it happened by chance.
Wow.
Yep. And so the reason that I started with those experiments was that I knew that I was becoming increasingly psychic. And I was going back to the pyramids a couple of times a year and spending time in there by myself or with a group by ourselves. And so I've now shown it scientifically. The data supports the hypothesis that being inside the pyramid can help you become more psychic.
Wow. That is incredible. So is there anyone out there that's doing anything to sort of like recreate these pyramids? I mean, I'm sure there is. It'd be great to talk to someone, maybe even on the show, but that's recreating pyramids just for these purposes, to work on psychic development.
Yes, I'll take you in two directions with that. I spoke at Global Pyramid Conference last year or the year before, and there was an organization in India, and they're building pyramids all over India for different purposes: meditation, housing people who don't have a place to be, even feeding people. And they put them on top of a houseboat, or they'll put them here and there. Guess how many new pyramids have been built in India in the past few years?
500.
20,000.
Holy smokes. Wow.
And then there's a man named Valery Yuvarov who was doing a lot of those studies with, putting medicine inside a pyramid and seeing if it helped more and all that. And he was hired by the largest produce company in Russia because they wanted somewhere to put produce before it got on the trucks to go to the grocery stores that would energize the food so that it would be more beneficial to people. And they approached Valery and he said, "We'll put it in a pyramid." So they gave him $5 million to build a functioning pyramid with 3 chambers and the whole thing. And the lower level of the pyramid is a warehouse for produce, and the rest of it is functioning for lots of other purposes. And they actually asked me to run a study to see if there was an effect on the 400,000 school children in the general vicinity of where they built this. And he used poured stone with crushed quartz as a polymer. And before the casing stones were even on this pyramid, in the center of the landmass in Russia, which is similar to where the Giza pyramids are, center of the landmass, before they even had finished putting the casing stones and the top part, the what do you even call that? They put a real quartz crystal at the top, a pyramidion. So some people think that there's a Merkaba-style upside-down pyramid under pyramids and that they would be the same size and shape as the above-ground part. But that's misleading because there is a triangular shape that's a shallow V, if you will, that's at the base of the pyramid. And then with Valery Uvarov's work, he made wings that were like the arms of the galaxy with crushed quartz crystal, a black one row and a white one in geopolymers, following Joseph Davidovich's work that shows that if you pour stone, it once it dries, it's hard to tell the difference between poured granite and cut granite. And so that's how the pyramid in Russia was built. And then all of the stones were placed around it so that the quartz in the structure of the pyramid would be under pressure. So it's not like there's a lot of chambers. There's usually 3 chambers in a pyramid, but they're all in different places, which I think speaks to the resonance and the differences in the tones and that sort of thing, almost like pushing the valves on an instrument, a flute or a trumpet. So under pressure, and then with this inverted triangle underneath, if there was an earthquake or flooding or anything, the stones actually subtly become tighter together, which makes the structure even more solid and resistant to weather and earth catastrophes and that sort of thing, which is why it may well be that the pyramids have been there longer than we think. Now,
interesting.
On that note, we've got Dr. Sam Osmanagic with the Bosnian Pyramid Project, who has been looking all over the world and finding pyramids, many of which are covered in soil and trees, which speaks to the idea that they would have been pre-Diluvian. So the pyramids were there, built in their grandeur, and here comes a world flood. So silt would end up over the pyramids, and as the water receded, there was enough soil there to actually seed vegetation, trees, whatever. So when you look at these kinds of pyramids, the trees are all different heights. So it's hard to imagine that it's a straight-sided pyramid, but when they're excavated, which is what they've been doing in Bosnia now for some 12 years, they're finding poured stone, stronger than any concrete we've got now.
Wow.
And poured stone in different layers. And one of the things that they found in Bosnia was a leaf blew in between the 3rd and 4th course, which is the levels of the pyramid of the stones. And they were able to carbon-14 date this leaf. And I saw the carbon-14 dating certificate with my own eyes 38,000 years ago.
Wow.
Yep.
That's incredible.
I know.
That's like, that's like definitive proof, right?
It is. But carbon-14 is easily damaged, if you will. Contaminated is a better word. And I'm sure they were very careful with it. But the older something is, it becomes plus or minus 2,000. Like if you were to measure the leftover wood in a campfire from 100 years ago, it would be plus or minus a year. But when you go back 40,000 years, it's plus or minus 3,000 or 4,000 years, right?
Wow.
But
either way, that is phenomenal.
I know.
Wow, that's absolutely incredible. All right, well, now seems like a good time to tell those of you who aren't familiar a bit about our sponsor, Gaia. I've been a big fan of Gaia for many years now, which is why they're the only content provider I have ever reached out to in regards to potentially supporting the Positive Head podcast. So needless to say, I'm very excited they're now supporting this show. Gaia truly is my personal go-to source for streaming consciousness content on the web. They have an incredible 7,000 plus exclusive videos covering 5,000 years of wisdom. They have a plethora of amazing content to always keep your positive head spinning. For example, in the brand new series Beyond the Legend, best-selling author of Chariot of the Gods, Eric von Daniken, takes us beyond the myths and legends that have shaped our view of history to present an alternate view of historical events, megalithic structures, and archaeological discoveries. Eric's been researching this stuff for over 50 years. So if you've ever wanted to deep dive into these sorts of topics that you're just not going to find on traditional networks, Eric is doing just that on Beyond the Legend. And that's just one example of fascinating content you can find on Gaia. As you all hear me constantly say, it's a daily conscious effort to maintain an elevated vibration. And if you're looking to go deep down the rabbit hole to do so, Gaia is the best place I know of to do it, period. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at Gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. So do you feel like is there a consensus sort of changing with sort of mainstream Egyptologists and, the scientific community where they're now, what do they say about that carbon dating, for example, of the leaf? That's
they won't even look at it. They won't look at it. And somebody like Dr. Zahi Hawass, who was invited to go to the Bosnian pyramids, basically, blacklisted it because he didn't want tourism to transfer to Bosnia. He wanted people to still come to Egypt, even though they weren't doing much to encourage tourism. But anyway, no, traditional Egyptologists have their Bible, which is the scripts of Ramses and whatever they say and the dates and the who, what, where, that, leaves me cold. And they won't consider any other theory, and they're not budging. And so interesting that Wallace Budge was someone who interpreted hieroglyphic, and, nobody's budging off what Budge says either. But I don't think that, having 26 letters in the English alphabet and having 4,000 Egyptian symbols warrants saying this is a C, this is an L. Really? No.
Right.
They weren't waiting for English to come along. And so people have been making stuff up about Egypt and repeating it. And I've got lots of reasons to say that. And even the director of the French Institute in Cairo, where Champollion did his work and all this stuff, we went, and I went there with Robert Bauval, actually, who had an inscription that he wanted interpreted. And the director said, oh, we only have one hieroglyphic expert who's not here. I can't even tell you if that's Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, Old Kingdom. I can't tell you what it is. So one person gets to decide what it says, and then everybody repeats it.
Right.
Well, that's not science.
Right. Interesting.
So no, the traditionalists are sticking with their story, and Egypt was warring, and they were a little bit infantile, and they were obsessed with stuff they shouldn't be obsessed with, and they worshipped animals. That's their thing, and they're sticking with it.
Right. Before we continue on with today's episode, I'd like to take a quick moment to tell you about our sponsor, Talkspace. When it comes to therapy, getting the help you need has never been so simple. Talkspace is like having a therapist in your pocket because you're able to access them from the comfort of your device via audio, video, or text 24/7. Talkspace is the #1 online therapy platform and has thousands of licensed therapists trained in over 40 specialties. I believe it is important, if you're struggling, to realize it's okay to seek therapy. And this is the simplest way I know of to do it. And it's for a fraction of the cost of in-house therapy. Once you join, you can speak with someone that same day. You'll set goals with your therapist, and they hold you accountable and make sure you're really progressing. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $100 off your first month with Talkspace. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com. Make sure to use the code POSITIVE to get $100 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's positive at Talkspace.com. Meanwhile, when you look at laser cut blocks and so forth, that's just, have they ever even come up with an explanation for any of that with sort of the modern?
No, the thing is that, I've 31 trips to Egypt. I overhear what guides say in a number of different languages, and they're just repeating, like I say, the rhetoric, and they're skipping over. And the thing is, if you're not looking for that kind of evidence, you don't see it. There's so much to look at. Even in this, I'm constantly finding stuff that I was, hidden in plain sight. At this time, I was taking pictures with my 18 megapixel camera, and the sun was reflecting off the floor in the Valley Temple.
Uh-huh.
And I was just looking at these photographs today, because I just got back a week ago, on my 4K TV. And these are crystal floors. They're unbelievably beautiful with the light shining on them. And it's like these crystal floors are all over the place. The remnants are there from Saqqara. These huge expanses of unbelievable technology, all with a purpose to build energy fields that are completely being ignored.
Right. Wow. Well, I guess we'll just have to see. And, if if and or when we sort of lift the veil on a lot of this stuff, and it, I'm hopeful that there will be, more and more of that happening, at least in future generations. I think one generation out, two generations out, are they going to stick to some of these same old scripts and stories, or is there going to be, an opening of minds and hearts to the idea of all the stuff that sort of goes hand in hand, not only with, looking at ancient civilizations, but ideas like, you just started right at the top of the, top of the show talking about something that, of course, would make a lot of mainstream scientists cringe, the idea of a past life or past life in Egypt. So I'm really curious about that. I absolutely love hearing any sort of accounts of recollections of past lives. Do you have, definitive past life recollections of Egypt?
Absolutely. And by the time I was 33, I had evidence of 85 of my own past lives. So basically, if you want a snapshot of who I am, it's having past life memory and running around the planet to see why or what.
That's incredible.
Really, I mean, honestly, that is what makes me go round. And, I managed to be a professor and, toe the party line and stand there and, be appropriate. But really, that's what runs in through me. And yes, absolutely. And that's why I keep going back to Egypt, because I remember a completely different way that things worked there. And we haven't had peace on the planet since. So if, I've also made a real study of analyzing how do we end up thinking what we think?
Right.
Well, the rhetoric is there. We've got a worldwide global culture. School, repeats and repeats and repeats the same, things, the old dead guys that, Darwin and Champollion and Freud and all of those guys. And we keep repeating what these guys said, whether it's true or not. And then turning people into spectators and consumers. So actually, when you talk about the next generations, unless they're coming in as indigo, rainbow, diamond kids, I don't know that there's too many people listening or caring about anything other than what's right in front of them. I mean, all of this, selfies and smartphones is turning people into,
zombies,
card-carrying narcissists.
Right. No, I hear you. I mean, I do maybe as the eternal optimist feel that there are people who, people's skepticism is at an all-time high of what we're being spoon-fed. And I think that's a good thing. And I think that will ultimately lead to, I think we'll look back in 100 years and say, wow, yeah, that's when we were still sort of being, having the wool pulled over our eyes in a major way. And it's part of our story and part of our history. And, now things are different. That's what I hope anyway. But
no, that's fair. And I'll comment on that if you don't mind, because of the success of the Pyramid Code and it being worldwide at 38 countries translated into 9 languages or whatever.
Wow.
I mean,
congratulations,
many
by
people,
the way. That's amazing.
Thank you. Many people have contacted me because they can't help it, because there's so much cognitive dissonance in what you watch on TV and even in a commercial, lies, that when something leaves you feeling quiet and asks questions instead of telling you it is. Like the Pyramid Code is not telling you anything new that is definitive. It's showing things that make you go, oh,
yep,
I guess that could, that feels right.
Yep.
And so it's really giving people back to themselves so that their instincts can stay in tune while they watch it. And then they feel like they've got to tell me, or my son drew this picture. It looks exactly like that thing, then that animation, and I had this dream and, and they've got to tell me. Now that has ended up giving me, 15,000 emails, or more, and it's all very nice that it resonated well with people. But the long and short of it is that there's so little of that these days that it shows me unequivocally that many people are still switched on.
Yeah.
And they can't leave these sacred mysteries alone. There are seekers, and this is where the success of your radio podcast comes up. And this is the community. So in some interesting way, I end up in conversations like this with you across time zones, across continents. Your listeners are interested in this sort of thing. So there's this kind of subculture of awareness of this sort of thing that is alive and growing.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And for that really gives me a sense of hope and optimism and, even taking yesterday, for example, watching some of the Pyramid Code before we jumped on today to record, and my teenage son, who's just a sponge for any and all information like this, and he's watching it, and it's really he's diving in deep, and for the first time on this subject anyway, and he walks away saying, gosh, it pisses me off that we've been all of this. And he's very logical. So of course he just loves your approach and way of breaking information down. And he's like, it as a young person, as a teenager, it's like he's pissed. He's like, this just, why do we live in a society where this would be sort of repressed by mainstream science? So I like to think and hope there will be more and more people like that, young people like that, who come up and, in that process, it becomes, we just finally sort of, throw off these, the one guy who tells us, because now we've got things like the internet and shows like this where we can all connect and share information and do our own research, right? So I applaud you for the work that you've done. One of the things that I would like to steer back to, because it is so fascinating to me, you'd said, remembering many of your own past lives. Do you have, and some of those in Egypt, do you have detailed sort of accounts? Are these like foggy sort of memories, or are there detailed accounts like, oh, I remember this and this is what this does, and this, I'm just curious how detailed your memories go, because that's a lot. You said 85?
Well, not 85 in Egypt,
right?
85 all over the world.
Still, that's a lot to recount, like a recall. Wow.
Well, and that's by the time I was 33 and I stopped counting.
Jeez.
But no, lots and lots and lots and lots of details. Absolutely. I mean, and in Egypt in particular, which is what's so captivating, because, like the first time my physical being came in touch with something that was physically from Egypt was in the National Museum in Athens in 1977 or 8, and 7, I guess. And I mean, my whole body just became electrified just
wow,
looking at the thing. And so I've had all kinds of experiences. Like there was a pin in a museum at Knossos in Crete. And I remember my energy just fell into that and went, somebody wore this, somebody from then. And who would that have been?
Right.
Something grabbed me and took me up to the hills to, and I was completely taken and shown something that took me 10 years to figure out what they were showing me, because they had chopped all the trees down. And I didn't realize it was a sacred grove where the priestesses had done their rituals and that sort of thing. So absolutely. When I see certain things, particularly from the Amarna period with Nefertiti and Akhenaten, I look at these fragments of stone decorations on the walls and jewelry and the floor that they have from one of the rooms, and I'm just like completely taken away by it energetically. So absolutely, I think, like I said before, I'm chasing my past lives around through this entire incarnation.
Would you care to share a story or two of things that you remembered, like scenes or events that you remember witnessing in past life recollections?
Well, okay. One time I was in the National Museum. Now, one of the things there, I mean, it's just a mess, because when Napoleon, he's the one that the French started the National Museum. And then it was given to the army when the French occupancy ended. And so they'd say, oh, this looks like a kitchen thing, let's put it over here. And they didn't leave things in situ with what they were found with. So when you're walking around the museum, it's like, whoa, it's if you're tuned in energetically, it's exhausting, because things aren't together. So you can put the story together. Like in other museums, whatever they found in the grave, they have with the things they found. And then people can say, oh, they must have had trade because they've got Egyptian glass. Anyway, so I was in this, one of the rooms that has wigs and the things that you would put makeup on. And I looked at this little blue box. And I was by myself in the museum. I mean, I wasn't with other people, so I could stand there as long as I needed to. And I remember looking at it and thinking, you know what? That was mine. I felt like it was mine.
Wow.
I really did. And I thought, oh, come on. All the voices are there too,
Sure.
Oh, what do you think? I mean, of course not. But I'm like, and I just stood there for the longest time going, why is that thing so familiar? And why do I even care? That
Yeah.
sort of thing happened over and over and over. There
Wow.
was another time when I had been looking for this place where the high priestess had trained the high level initiates and the priestesses and that sort of thing. And I was, like I said, in and out of the holes on the plateau. I'd go on the plateau at night when the sun would set and it would close to the public. And I had guides that would help me do that. And I was looking and looking, and I felt like the hide and seek. You're getting warmer, you're getting cooler. I'm like, where is this place? Looked, and no, I went up the Nile. No, it was getting cooler and around the plateau. And finally, it was one of the most restricted places that nobody gets to go. And somehow I ended up being able, and I kicked my shoes off, and my foot touched the stones of this temple, and it started to run like a movie. I could see all the
Wow.
flowers, I could see the priestesses, the candles, and there was this wall, and I was walking by myself on this floor, and the whole thing was lighting up like a movie. And I went around that corner. There's this little door about 3 feet high, and I went over, and there was a plaque over the top, a metal thing that had been bolted to it, so you couldn't go through.
Uh-huh.
And it was 3 feet high. And it was a passageway that went underneath the Grand Causeway beside the Sphinx to the second pyramid, etc.
Wow.
Very vivid.
Wow.
Very vivid. I know. So after that, I was like, I knew it. I knew it was around here somewhere.
Wow. That's absolutely fascinating.
It is.
What a cool account. So what are your thoughts on, of course you hear a lot of talk with, of course you have things like the carvings that look like a helicopter or, light bulb or astronaut or, these different, one that almost looks like a UFO. What are your thoughts on the whole idea of ETs being involved potentially with ancient Egypt?
Well, first of all, the thing you're talking about is at Abydos, and I stood there a couple of days ago when I was looking at the pictures of the helicopter, the submarine, and
Right.
An airplane. And what the traditionalists will tell you that there's a combinations of hieroglyphic, and you're reading them wrong. Well, actually, at the place at Abydos where that is, there used to be stone over the top of it, and about 10 years ago, all of a sudden the stone came crashing down into the temple, and that was what was underneath.
Oh, wow. So we didn't even know that was there until recently.
Yes, and someone hit it. Okay?
Wow.
And then there's the King's List there. And so Nefertiti and Akhenaten, Tut, and Hatshepsut they're primarily focused on in the Pyramid Code because they were the ones where the energy was percolating back up from a more spiritual time. So they were still within dynastic Egypt, all in the 18th dynasty. Well, their names were erased from the King's List.
Wow.
Well, they were threatening because it wasn't about feeding the Amun priesthood. We still say Amen. The Amun priesthood was corrupt. They made people pay for their salvation. It wasn't about having a pure heart. It was about paying them to go to the other side. And so this is corruption.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I know. It's fascinating. The whole thing is really fascinating that these were people who were actually people like us, but maybe they were starseed. So when they're talking even about the beings that they're finding in the flash frozen down in Antarctica, they're talking about distended skulls and a kind of a belly and wider hips. And, well, who looks like that? Nefertiti and Akhenaten. They say, well, their art was stylized. No, there's distended skulls all over the place. But when the Smithsonian is given some of this stuff, they go and dump it in the ocean. Giants, different beings that had, a different cranial capacity. So they may have been smarter with larger pineal glands. And now our pineal glands are all calcified from fluoride. And, we're all dumbed down thinking we're so smart. They keep telling us we're the smartest we've ever been. And we can't figure anything out. So I'm going to vote that we're not the smartest we've ever been.
Right. Wow. So you believe there is, and I know you don't know definitively, but do you believe that there was potentially extraterrestrial contact or involvement with the pyramids?
Well, I think that's the wrong. Well, it's an unfortunate term that is now laden with little green men from Mars and Greys and all that. I prefer the concept of starseed.
Okay.
Now, even Hatshepsut, and here's an experience just from last week. So Hatshepsut, there's this whole, and it's been very badly damaged in Darrell Bari at her temple, of her being divine, because she claimed that when her father was impregnating her mother, that a being came into the father's body and impregnated the mother, and this being was divine, which made her half divine.
Wow.
And so I'm overhearing the guide say, well, she wanted everybody to like her, and they didn't like her because she was a woman. And so she made up this story so that everybody would like her.
Right.
So later I sat down with the guy and I said, look, what if that's a little bit too subjective and you don't really know what she was thinking, and it was on the temple walls because it could be true? How would our perception of Hatshepsut change if that was true? And you should have seen him. He's like, well, I don't know. That's what everybody says. She made it up.
Right. I was told.
So I say she was starseed, and funny-shaped hat covers funny-shaped head.
Mm-hmm.
And so Nefertiti and Akhenaten and all their daughters had distended skulls, Tut too. And so what if they were starseed? What if they had more capacity for everything, for memory, for magic, for psychicness?
Right.
And they had a fuller deck than we have. And so they were more high-functioning beings. So in the Pyramid Code, Hakim talks about 360 senses, full spectrum senses, not just 5 senses, right? And so perhaps starseed beings were present, but Hakim doesn't like the idea of giving our power away to ETs did it. Oh, they came in with spaceships and they had anti-gravity and they did it. No, he's saying that they were professional people, engineers and architects, and the wise ones. It wasn't slaves that built the pyramids, being whipped by their master to do something for the ego of the pharaoh. That's what we do. That's what we do.
Right.
That's not what they thought. And so what if we were all more tuned in to channeling ancestors and beings? Like, we've wiped that out. In 323 AD, Emperor Constantine made reincarnation illegal.
Right.
And if you talked about it, they'd kill you.
Right.
So now when people say, "Oh, reincarnation, oh, past lives," Tarot, well, you're not supposed to. And now, I remember when yoga and yogurt were weird, but now everybody's doing that. So it's slowly coming into the collective, right? But channeled messages, connecting to a wise being that can speak through a human who puts themselves aside for a minute. That was normal for them.
Right. Yeah, and it's funny because one of my favorite teachers that I share on, I do daily episodes 4 days a week and one interview like this. But on my daily episodes, more often than anyone else, I share Esther Hicks, who claims to be channeling a non-physical entity that refers to itself as Abraham. And as I always say, look, the information is so profound. It's so much wisdom. So I don't even get hung up that much on, is it or isn't, channeling. It's like, look at what's coming through. One way or another, whatever's coming through is brilliant. So, yeah, I mean, it's, I guess it's here, and it's, I think you're seeing more and more acceptance of these possibilities, maybe not in the scientific community, but, yeah, it's, it makes a whole lot of sense to me.
Okay. Now, I've done a lot of research on, can you measure what's unseen?
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean that it's 100% right. But it's interesting because they refer to her as Abraham Hicks because she's Esther Hicks and the entity's Abraham. And we accept that that's who's speaking. And, so whether she's a trance channel, which means that she doesn't remember and has to be told what's being said later, or she's a conscious channel and she's hearing it as it goes through, again, doesn't matter, the being's talking. And let's say 85% of what's channeled is right. If you use a pendulum, 85% of it's right. Okay, well, how do you discern which 15% isn't right? Then we need to rely on ourselves, on our own instinct. That's, either we open to something or we close, right? So we're either contracting away from something, which would be a no, or we open to something, which would be a yes. And are we consulting with ourselves to even tune into this sort of thing and notice how we feel when we hear something.
Right.
And stay open until more information comes.
One of the things that I would like to touch on a little bit, if you would, is you had mentioned prior to us turning on the recording some new scanning technologies that are revealing more under the pyramids. What can you tell us a little bit about that?
There's a group called Scan Pyramids, and they were using some thermal testing. Now, I've had access to high definition satellite scans that's working with logarithms at Hawara, and you may have seen some of that work I've been doing. And so the first thing to do is to analyze what the technology is and how they're using it. But lots of people don't know how to measure that and how to analyze what the technology is. So I was surprised to see them using drones, of which I had one, she died, but to be able to do 3D mapping from the outside, but not look inside. And they've been using this thermal stuff. So I was actually invited to be on The Other Side of Midnight with Richard Hoagland. And he said, well, what are these scans and what are the results? Because they're saying, oh my God, we found these extra chambers in the pyramids. So I'm like, okay. Right. So I went and I looked at their videos and whatnot. And then I ended up just having my head fall into my hands and go, oh, come on. Because when they first opened the Great Pyramid, they did a forced entry. Al-Nudin came in 791 or something. And they were boiling vinegar and pouring it on the limestone and softening it and then hacking away for 30 meters and just smashing their way through the solid rock into the pyramid. And so they came to a point where a little piece of rock dislodged and went down, and they heard this thing go clunk at the bottom, right? Kind of like when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Nag Hammadi texts. Right. You know, there was a hole in the ground and something hit a piece of pottery and they went, wait, there's a hollow there. Well, and what they had come to, so they moved in the direction of where the sound was. And lo and behold, they ended up in the ascending passage. So where they started was the third course, which is the third set of big stones. So, you know, if you were climbing the pyramid, you'd go up 3 big steps. And then there was this big earthquake and the casing stones broke apart. And then a lot of the mosques fell apart were damaged in Cairo. So they took the casing stones, they used it as an open quarry, and they rebuilt their mosques by taking the casing stones off the Great Pyramid and other pyramids around. And so then what was revealed on the 19th course was the real entrance/exit, because when the pyramid was found, it was completely sealed, right? Wow. And without a mummy and without anybody in there, nobody could get in. So all these years, people are walking around going, wow, look at that thing, but nobody could get in, right? And then the other thing is that the weather when it was first built could have been tropical, but because it's desert, all the soil and stuff blew off, and so we see the pyramids exposed because of the temperature now. Anyway, so where they're saying these secret chambers are, these new chambers that nobody's ever heard of, is the original entrance.
Oh my goodness.
I'm like, who's asking these questions? Like, don't you know anything about Egypt? And then they're trying to say that they're using thermal technology to see cavities inside by using drones. No, that's going to measure the outside. Okay, so those sorts of things. And the other one was, you know, I got asked, might have been Richard Hoagland again. So they're saying that they found Nefertiti and that there was a secret passage inside King Tut's tomb. Did you follow that one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So first of all, in 2009, Joanne Fletcher, who's a specialist on hair, had access to 3 royal mummies from the Amarna period. And so they decided that one of them must be Nefertiti. Well, in my opinion, you're not going to find her, but that's neither here nor there. Right. But they concluded in 2009 that they found her. So now we're talking about King Tut's tomb. Well, first of all, King Tut was buried, I say, in a hurry, and he had one of the most inordinately small tombs that I say was a cache of mummies that didn't have their own burial place, and they needed a tomb quick, so they just took a bunch of furniture from Amarna and threw it all in there and closed the door. They covered him in blue lotus petals and made it hermetically sealed. Well, now they're trying to say that Nefertiti is in there with him in a secret passage. Well, wait, where have you ever seen two royals buried in one tomb? A. B. She would have had to die the same day as him.
Right.
C. If you take King Tut's tomb and look at the artist's rendition of how it was found, him lying, at his feet was one opening for a small room that had stuff. And to the right, at about shoulder level on the ground, was the other door. So they're trying to say that the secret passage is there. Well, that's the door where half the stuff was, and the other side's the door. There's basically a 3-room tomb. Well, Ramses II had a 75-room tomb.
Wow.
Right? Okay, so none of it adds up. Well, then they're going to have a group of professionals come for a roundtable discussion to decide if it's possible that Nefertiti was there. Well, forget that you think you already found her. And
Yeah.
B, if you really care and you're part of the Department of Antiquities, open the door and look.
Yeah.
So it's completely illogical, but people don't know how to assess it. So, I mean, I'm not trying to, put these people down. It sounds like I am, I suppose.
Right.
But, I mean, you need to know how to analyze it. Otherwise, you just keep believing it. Now, I don't think they're ever going to find Nefertiti, and I've got my reasons for that. And now I can go on about that for a while. But anyway, that's the sort of thing. And then, they print stories that this new tomb was found outside the Valley of the Kings. Well, they didn't put tombs outside the Valley of the Kings. And we don't know who it is, but it could be Ankhesenaten, who's Tut's wife. Well, if you don't know who it is, why are you giving it a name? And then they say, and Dr. Zahi Hawass is going to send a team. Well, he's been gone for 5 years. So these articles don't add up. On the latest one, now that you got me going, a couple of days before I went to Egypt, my friend from Norway says, oh, they opened the new museum. I go, well, you were there with me. We saw the cranes 6 months ago. The building's huge. How could it be finished? Well, it says right here it's open to the public and it's free until February. And I'm like, I don't think so. Because when they said they were building the new Library of Alexandria, they said it was open. So I booked my tour and we got a bus to go to Alexandria, and they hadn't even dug the hole in the ground.
Jeez.
So then they said a couple of years later that it was open. So I called the travel agent. I said, is the Library of Alexandria open? Yes. Okay, let's book it. So we went up there again a couple of years later, and now they had dug the hole in the ground, but there was nothing finished. Well, this went on for 12 years. Then they opened it. So when they say that this museum that had the cranes that I saw, is open, I don't think so. However, and now the cranes are still there, they're wrapping things up in the National Museum, and they say they're moving them to the new museum. They want a reason to have this stuff disappear. And suddenly, after all these years, you can take cell phone pictures in the National Museum. Well, I took pictures of 50 empty cases of King Tut's treasures all wrapped up in plastic and boarded up, ready to take them out. Whole rooms that have been closed since they did the Hatshepsut exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum with 28 statues. So there is a lot of corruption going on and a lot of stuff being stolen. And the National Museum right now is filthy. And it's almost like, well, they're going to have a new museum in a couple of years, so why clean it? It's heartbreaking.
Wow. Well, what are you going to do? Hopefully just more and more people will continue doing the incredible type of work like you're doing to expose what's really going on and to at least prompt the questions, the real questions, and not just adopting what's being spoon-fed. I do have a question, though, for you that I love to ask, anyone who's a guest. I'm fascinated by stories of synchronicity or serendipity or positive paranormal stories, if you will. And I'm curious, have you had anything like this happen to you while visiting Egypt that you'd like to share?
Well, tons, and lots of stuff like that happens. I mean, every day that I'm there. But the one that I like the best here is last trip, not a week ago, but the trip before in March. We were going to have a private meditation, if you will, inside the Great Pyramid with the group. So, I mean, I've been hanging around the Great Pyramid, and I spent a lot of time in there by myself, in the dark, in the pit, 3.5 hours in the dark in the pit, like lots of stuff that, like I'm saying, is switched on different things inside me.
Right.
And it's been a long time since the champion had the keys. And anyway, so the guy who had the keys to the pyramid picked me out of the group, and of course it's my group, and he handed me the keys and he said, "You open the pyramid." I'm like, really? So I did, and then I start walking away with the keys. It goes, doctor, and I go, look, I've been waiting to get these keys for 20 years. Now I've got them. And he's like, no, you can't keep them. Anyway, so then a couple of days later, we fly down to Luxor, and we're at Karnak going to the shrine to Sekhmet. And that's, they keep it locked, and only people who know about it can possibly get in. And this is a couple of days later, and there's no way those watchmen are talking to each other. And we get there, and it's time to open the door, and the watchman gives me the keys. The second time. Well, I've been going to Egypt a lot, and I lived over there for 2.5 years, and that, anyway, that's part of the
You haven't been given the keys on too many occasions before that, though.
Ever. And then within a couple of days, 2 sets of guards give me the keys.
Wow.
So I'm like, okay. I thought that was pretty interesting. And what's that supposed to make me think? There's another force that's somehow speaking through all that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the chances are highly, highly unlikely. And that's, although I can't think of anyone who would deserve to have access to the keys more. Carmen, this has been absolutely fascinating to pick your brain on this topic. And I know we could go on, and maybe we'll have to do a follow-up sometime. Or even better, you lead expeditions to Egypt regularly, correct? Perhaps
now
I can join you on one of those.
And I'm leading tours twice a year. And so pyramidcode.com has the details. I'm just about to post the next group, just, finalizing the program. So that'll be spring. So typically spring, fall, around equinox, maybe not exactly on equinox. But yeah, so why don't you bring your son?
Yeah, I would love to. I'm sorry, when did you say this is?
At the end of February, beginning of March, somewhere in there.
Ooh,
I'm just finalizing the dates. I've been talking to a couple of different travel agencies today.
Oh, I would love to do that. Now, if I couldn't make that one, you're doing them how frequently?
Twice a year.
Twice a year. Okay. I am going to come on one of these, and if listeners out there want to connect with you and take a trip to Egypt, what's the best way for them to follow your work and reach out to you about that?
So pyramidcode.com, contact us, has got my email. And, I've got a Patreon page now, and
cool.
GoFundMe, The New Atlantis. I'm working on another series. So Twitter, Carmen.Boulter, Facebook, but I'm piled up with too many friends already, but sometimes they clear and there's room.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, this has been absolutely fascinating. I've been looking forward to this for so long, and you definitely have not disappointed. And I do have one last question I'd like to leave you with. As I mentioned earlier, I like to open with the same question and end with the same question. So the question I like to end with, in 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life according to Dr. Carmen Boulter?
I think we're here to remember where we came from and what happens when we leave. And so the ancient Egyptians were concerned with biology, how we get here, and cosmology, what happens when we leave. And I think that's the big mystery that they were trying to tell us about. And that's what I think the whole meaning of life is.
Well, you are certainly contributing to understanding that mystery, those mysteries, and I applaud your work. And thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. This has been absolutely fascinating.
Well, thank you so much, Brandon.
Until next time. And hopefully next time I see you, it's going to be because I've got my luggage and I'm ready to head off to Egypt with you.
Well, don't forget your son. He'll never forgive you if you don't bring him.
No, he definitely will want to go. I can guarantee you that. So thank you again, Carmen. This has been wonderful.
Okay, you take care, and I'll look forward to talking to you again.
Likewise. Also, before we sign off, I wanted to remind you to download the Golden Key audio or ebook as my free gift to you at goldenkey.gift using the Golden Key code POSITIVEHEAD. And please, if you enjoy my gift, leave a positive review on Amazon so others can find the book and unlock their lives with the help of the Golden Key as well.